All right. Welcome everyone. We've got so much feedback going on from the Pilla Tax Academy show. Dan, I mean it's amazing what information, the correct information will do for people. As a matter of fact, it's the correct information to be able to be empowered. This subject of taxes, I can't tell you how many people we're talking to on a daily basis that are saying, I don't know what to do sometimes, especially with what's happened in 2020 with this COVID crisis, and all of a sudden people getting PPP loans. That's the payroll protection plan loans. Is creating a lot of confusion, Dan. So you got a lot to say about this subject because you got firsthand knowledge of what's going on. Dan, how can you start the show off for all the viewers and bring some absolute rest to the chaos?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jay. And first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the Pilla Tax Academy show as well. I'm Dan Pilla. It's my pleasure to help you comply with the Internal Revenue Code. That's what this program is all about, showing people how to not get trapped by any one of the 4 million words that are in the Internal Revenue Code. You know, I was on a conference today with an IRS person that I was representing a client in a penalty case, and I was arguing to the IRS for abatement of these particular penalties, Jay. And I was telling the IRS guy, look, we've got a tax code that consists of 4 million words, and people get tripped up in these in these pitfalls and the quagmires and the quicksand of imagine 4 million words of tax law that you have to comply with. And part of that is, as you mentioned, Jay, the Paycheck Protection Program, which was part of the CARES Act passed last spring, part of the coronavirus response, federal government's coronavirus response. Millions of businesses took Paycheck Protection Program loans. Program tonight is to follow up on what we talked about last week to help small businesses comply with the tax requirements, reporting requirements, the record keeping requirements that you have to have with these PPP loans. And I want to pick up where we left off. Maybe we can take a minute to stripe the field again here, Jay, based on what we talked about last week. But I want to go on and talk about other things here tonight that small business people need to know about these Paycheck Protection Program loans.
Well, here's a quick recap. That question, I should say, a recap question that's coming in, Dan. People are asking, can you at least briefly reiterate about the deducted expenses with PPP money? That's the most that we've had come in. Make sure you offer your mute here.
1,000 times over the last couple of months for sure. The IRS issued a ruling last week, Jay. This is what we talked about on last week's program. The IRS issued a ruling that very clearly says if you received a Paycheck Protection Program loan and you qualified, or let me say that you complied with all of the spending requirements for the PPP loan. In other words, you use that money only for the items that are authorized under the Paycheck Protection Loan Program, and you qualify to have your loan forgiven, then you can absolutely not claim the expenses that you paid with PPP money as a deduction on your tax return. So let's understand this now, Jay. If you got the money, you don't have to pay taxes on the loan. There's nothing new about that. We all know that. Loan money, if you get a loan on your credit card, if you buy a loan or get a loan to buy a car, you get a loan to buy a house or a building, or you get a loan for just necessary operating business expenses, that money is never taxed as income. When you pay the money back, you don't get a deduction for the principal. You get a deduction for the interest, but not the principal. And so now, with the Paycheck Protection Program loan, it's different, because if you qualify under the law, if you follow all the steps the law requires and use that money exactly as the law requires, then you get forgiveness of the loan. And not only that, Jay, ordinarily, if you get loan forgiveness, the amount of forgiveness is considered income. In other words, you got to report it on your tax return and pay taxes on the income from this, not with a PPP loan. If that loan is forgiven, you do not pay taxes on it. So think about this for a minute. All right, you don't have to claim the loan as income. You pay expenses with the money that are authorized. When you do that, you don't have to pay the money back. It's completely forgiven. And then on top of that, you don't have to claim that debt forgiveness as income. So in every sense of the word, Jay, it's free money. But the proviso is, and this is per the order that the IRS issued last week, you cannot claim a deduction on your tax return for expenses that you paid with PPP money. This is very, very clear. I know there's been a lot of confusion about this over the last couple of months. There's been a lot of debate going back and forth between Congress people and senators arguing about whether it should be this way or should be that way. Set all that aside. The IRS has issued a revenue ruling, and the revenue ruling is very clear that you can't claim a deduction if you qualify to have that loan forgiven, or if in fact your loan was forgiven in 2020. You can't claim a deduction for it. Now, there's an exception to that, which we can get into.
But you know everybody wants to know the exception. That was my next question, Dan. What is the exception?
Yeah, there's always exceptions. That's the one thing about a tax code, Jay, that consists of 4 million words that were changed more than 5,900 times just since 2001 alone, and that doesn't even count all of the things that happened in 2020. So there's an exception here now, and here's what the exception is: if you had your loan denied, all right, if you made an application for forgiveness of your PPP loan, and it was denied in 2020 for whatever reason. All right, you didn't spend the money properly. That would be the only reason, really, if you didn't spend the money properly, or I suppose theoretically, maybe you didn't qualify for the loan in the first place. But in any event, if you applied for forgiveness through your lender, and your lender or the SBA turned you down in 2020, and you have your denial letter in hand now, you can claim a deduction for the expenses that you paid with the PPP money. If you don't get the loan forgiven, then you can claim the deduction. Now, there's another exception, Jay. This gets a little bit convoluted, but I'm going to work through this pretty systematically here. The other exception is if you never applied for forgiveness because you know you're not going to get the debt forgiven. So in other words, you know that you did not use the money properly. You know that when you report this to the SBA, to your lender, and then to the SBA, that they're going to turn you down. So you either withdraw your application for forgiveness, or you don't even file one in the first place. Now you've got an option. You can claim the deductions, no doubt about that. But now they can either be claimed on the 2020 tax return, or the IRS's new ruling allows you to claim it in 2021, depending on your timing. All right. So, you tell me if we want to get more specific with this, we can.
Right.
You want me to drill in this to a little bit more deeply, we can do that. You tell me where we want to go with this now.
I think the information is so critical. I think that if you can go just a little bit further, because this is going to affect what, Dan? Hundreds of people, thousands of people,
No,
millions of people.
No, there's tens of millions of small businesses that got these PPP loans, Jay. There's upwards of $1 billion in revenue that was, basically handed out by the federal government starting at the end of March, 1st of April, going all the way through the end of June, and literally millions of businesses got these loans. So yeah, let's get a little bit more detail. All right, we already talked about 2020. If you got your rejection letter in 2020, then you've got the clear option to claim the deductions on your 2020 tax return. But now let's work through a scenario that's going to be very common. Let's say you make your application for debt forgiveness in 2020, but you don't hear until next year in 2021 whether your debt's forgiven or not. Now let's make it even a little more complicated. Let's say that you've already filed your 2020 tax return, and you don't get word from the SBA until let's say May or June of 2021 that your loan is denied. All right, well, not only have you not claimed the deductions on your 2020 tax return, but now your loan cancellation's been denied. In that case, Jay, you've got the option to claim the deductions on the 2021 tax return. So here's what you have to do, and this is very, very important. In accordance with the IRS's revenue procedure, we talked about a revenue ruling. All right, a revenue ruling is the IRS's statement on their belief as to what the law is. So they write this statement, this treatise on what they think the law is, right? That's their opinion on what the law is. And by the way, it's important to understand that the courts will generally back up the IRS's opinion on the law unless they're just flat wrong. Now, the IRS can be flat wrong. They're wrong a lot of the time. In this particular case, I don't happen to think they are wrong, but let's set that aside for just a second. So the revenue ruling, Jay, is the IRS's position on what the law is, all right? This is their legal opinion, so to speak, for public consumption. The revenue procedure is the step-by-step process that they expect taxpayers to follow in light of their legal opinion. So now I'm talking about the revenue procedure. The revenue ruling says you can't write it off if you're going to get forgiveness. The revenue procedure tells you what to do if you don't get forgiveness, all right? So the first part of the revenue procedure says if you've got your denial letter in 2020, you know that you're not getting that loan forgiven because they've either told you it's not going to be forgiven, or you know doggone well it won't be forgiven because you didn't qualify, right? You didn't follow the rules properly. If that's the case in 2020, then the deductions go on your 2020 tax return. Now, if the clock turns over, if the calendar rolls over to 2021, which is going to happen in a few weeks here, and you haven't heard, all right, you haven't heard, but now let's say in February of 2020, the SBA turns down your loan forgiveness application. In that situation, you got an option. You can either claim it on the 2020 tax return, or you can claim it on the 2021 tax return. All right, if you've already filed your 2020 tax return by the time you hear, let's say you file your 2020 tax return in April of 2021, and in May of 2021, they turn down your loan. Now you can amend your 2020 tax return, or you can claim the deductions on your 2021 tax return. So the revenue procedure gives you this option. That the most important thing that people need to understand, Jay, and this revenue procedure is crystal clear about that. I've got that right here. The revenue procedure is crystal clear about that. If you're going to claim deductions in either 2020 or 2021 based on actions that the SBA takes in 2021, then you have to make an election on your tax return. There has to be a statement filed with your tax return, Jay, that explains that the election is based on this revenue procedure we're talking about. And the revenue procedure is Revenue Procedure 2020-51. And you've got to identify the statement. So make these notes for your tax preparer, right? Your CPA or your tax pro that does your tax return. Make sure they understand.
Dan, shouldn't those tax preparers already know what you're saying?
Well, yeah, Jay, they're supposed to know that, but you know, listen, there's a lot of great tax preparers out there. There's a lot of great CPAs. There's no question about that. But this is a different world, Jay. This tax compliance and tax litigation is a completely different world from tax preparation. So I just want my small business owners out there that are with us here now on Pilla Tax Academy. I don't want you guys getting in trouble. So write this down: Revenue Procedure 2020-51. This is the statement you need to include with your tax return. And I'm going to tell you what this has to say, all right? It's got to have your name and address. Obviously, that typical information, if it's with your tax return, that stuff's going to be there, but it's got to be on the statement as well. And you've got to specifically state that you are applying for relief under this revenue procedure, and there's two different sections of relief. One applies to a situation where you don't qualify for the loan forgiveness. The other one is where you've withdrawn it. And then you've got to make a statement as to whether you're applying your deductions for 2020 or 2021. And then you've got to state the amount and date of your PPP loan. So the amount of money you got from SBA, the date that your loan was funded. You've got to specifically state the total amount of forgiveness that you were denied or that you decided not to seek. And then you've got to state the total amount of eligible business expenses that you're claiming on the tax return. All of this, Jay, has to be on that statement. Now, in case there's any confusion, one of the benefits of becoming a member of our organization, Jay, which you're going to talk about a little bit further, is my newsletter, Pilla Talks Taxes, my monthly newsletter that we send to all of the people that subscribe to our program. And this is where you get the detailed, updated information on an ongoing basis. So all of the new things that come out and all of the changes that come out that affect you, your tax life, your compliance life in particular, we talk about this stuff in the newsletter. So I've got this laid out for you step by step so you know exactly what to do and exactly how to do it so you don't fall into a quicksand quagmire.
See, I believe that everyone that has a small business or any business, you have to know this information. I believe, Dan, just going through your material, reading some of your material, this is what I've learned. Watching what you put together with your tax mastery courses. If people don't know this information, it's just like any time they're going to fall off of a cliff. And I cannot reiterate enough how important it is that people get educated. You see, people perish from what? Lack of knowledge. So get over to pillataxacademy.com and get your mastery course. If you have a business, you have no business not getting the business owner's tax mastery course that Dan Pilla did himself, virtual. This was virtually done to where it's like Dan is in your living room or in your office with you, and you can hit stop and you can hit play and you can take notes. And there's a virtual notebook that will be provided for you to keep track of it, to where you'll know that you know how to master taxes. Isn't it time? Dan, don't you think it's time that business people, if the government's not going to do it for us, don't you think it's time that we as business owners, we take responsibility so we don't run into these traps? What do you have to say about that, Dan?
Well, that's a good point, Jay, because here's the thing that people need to understand. And I talk about this in the mastery course, and I make this point in my newsletter, which is part of the mastery course. So you're going to hear from me 10 times a year, Jay, with a very detailed, very specific newsletter. It's going to help you it's going to help you a great deal in your compliance efforts. But here's the thing we need to understand. All right, the responsibility. Listen to this now. This is very important. The responsibility to file a correct tax return is non-delegable. All right. The IRS is going to take the position that if you sign that tax return, it is presumed that you know the information that's in the return. And because you're signing the return under penalty of perjury, it's presumed that you know the information and that you're telling the truth. Now,
Dan,
you
can I
have a
just
right.
interrupt you real quick? I'm so sorry,
Sure.
because when you said that point, I got to make sure our viewers and people that are going to watch this recording, I want to make sure they understand. If somebody, once they sign their name on that tax return, the IRS is going to assume that you understand those 4 million words in that code. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly right. Yeah, that is precisely correct, Jay. Knowledge is imputed to you. This is the legal phrase that the IRS is going to use, the courts will use. It is the knowledge of what's in the return is imputed to you when you sign it. That is to say, the legal presumption is that you know what's in that tax return when you sign it. So there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, you need to sit down when you have your tax preparer. And I'm not telling you not to use a preparer. Please don't misunderstand me. Accountants play a very, very important role. And in fact, in the small business mastery course, I have an entire section in that course that shows you exactly how to interact with your CPA so you get the most benefit from your tax pro. That's the key. How to get the most benefit from your tax pro. And here's one of the things that I mentioned is to make sure that you sit down with your tax pro and go through your tax return. Don't just show up at the office at 10 to 6 at night, grab the return, sign it, and throw, and have the return either e-filed or you drop it in the mail. You got to go through the return with your tax pro so you understand what's in it. Because as I said, the IRS is going to impute that knowledge to you, and you say, "Well, I didn't know. Well, you were supposed to know. Now, it is also important to understand that you have the right to rely on counsel. If you rely on counsel in good faith, and counsel made a mistake, which happens all the time, that can be grounds for forgiveness of penalties. But the important thing, Jay, is that you, the taxpayer, have to prove that you provided all the accurate information to counsel, and that you understood what counsel, and that you provided the accurate information to counsel, and that you didn't provide misinformation or lack of information to counsel. So it's still, the burden is still on you to demonstrate how you interacted with that counsel in a responsible and reasonable way. This is non-delegable, Jay. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who say, well, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people, Jay, who say to me, well, Dan, I thought my accountant was going to do this, or I thought this person. Hey, listen, you have the affirmative duty to do this stuff. And as I said, the IRS is going to assume that you did it right because you signed the tax return and that you knew what you were doing when you signed the tax return. So it's an important thing to understand this, Jay.
This right here should be waking everyone up. Now, I heard something earlier that I want to circle back to. You said if you get a denial notice on your PPP loan in February 2021, I bet you there's people that have no clue. What I should say this: there's people that did loan applications for PPP, and you're saying, Dan, they might not know until next year whether they got
Yeah,
approved or not.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. It's going to depend on two things, Jay. First of all, the regulations for the SBA say that the lender is supposed to give a decision within 30 days. Once the lender renders a preliminary decision, so let's say you got your SBA your PPP loan through the ABC bank down on the corner. I don't care what bank it is. Any SBA lender in the country was authorized to write the paper and fund these loans. Okay, so there's hundreds and hundreds of banks all across the country that were funding these loans. So when you make your application for debt forgiveness, that application goes to your lender first. The lender reviews it and they make a preliminary decision. The lender has 30 days from the date you submit your application in which to either tentatively approve or deny the forgiveness. If it's approved, it goes up to the SBA and they do a final review for a final approval, right? The bank's approval is preliminary, the SBA approval is final. Once the SBA gets the file, they've got 60 days to look at it and give you a decision. So it is possible that your forgiveness process may take as many as 90 days. Well, here we are, December the 10th. The tax year is going to be over here in another 3 weeks. Your tax return is going to be obviously due next April unless you get an extension. But once the year is over with, Jay, it's over with. That wraps it up. You might not know whether your loan's been forgiven until 2021. Now, if the loan is denied before you file your 2021 tax return, then you've got the option that I talked about. It can either go on 2020 or it can go on 2021, but you've got to make that election. And this gets back to the revenue procedure I was talking about, the revenue procedure 2020-51. That election needs to be made on your tax return. It's got to be in writing. It's got to be clear. It's got to meet all the 7 points that I laid out for you. And I have those 7 points very, very clearly spelled out in the newsletter, part of the tax mastery course that we're offering here. And so you will have that information in your hands so you can double check, circle back with your tax pro, double check, make sure the tax pro understands that this election has to be made if you weren't denied until 2021.
How important it is. Dan does hours and hours and hours of information. You have an encrypted, secure portal where you can grab this information. Now, it's going to cost you $495 for the course, which I told Dan and other experts that Dan is way too inexpensive because businesses with this information, they can save that with a couple of swipes of the pen of knowledge. But Dan's even offering $100 off. So $395 in the preliminary stages of launching the Business Mastery course. So if you go to PillaTaxAcademy.com and you click on the product section, get that course so that you can go into the next year equipped. And by the way, I think, Dan, they can write that off as an expense, can't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you're any small business owner, Jay, that spends money on tax professional help, counsel, tax professional or tax education, such as what this is, it's absolutely a business tax deduction. No question
This is
about it.
awesome. We got some questions coming over here. This is a unique question. George is asking, he says, I'm retired. I do not run any business, but I received a PPP check. Do I qualify for forgiveness or not?
Well, my guess, George, is that you actually did not get a PPP check. My guess is that you only get a PPP check if you applied for a paycheck protection loan through an authorized SBA lender. My guess, George, is what you got is the $1,200 stimulus check. All right, the $1,200 stimulus check that the IRS mailed out to everybody starting in about April of last year. It went through May and June. So So this is, I'm just guessing now. If you did not make it, if you don't just get a PPP check in the mail, all right? You had to apply for that. So you got that $1,200 stimulus check. Now that $1,200 stimulus check, George said, look, we're gonna give everybody $1,200 against their tax liability. In other words, it's like somebody else paying your taxes. A tax credit is like somebody else paying your taxes for you. So instead of waiting for that tax credit to show up on the tax return, they sent you the check in the mail, and that is the stimulus check, right? So that's what you got, George. You don't have to spend that in any particular way. You don't have to spend it at all. You don't have to make an application for forgiveness of that money because it's not a loan. You can do anything you want with it. I'm certain, George, that that's what happened in your case. I'm just certain of that.
Great knowledge, great knowledge. Hey, Dan, this is a big one over here. People are asking this like crazy. What does Dan Pilla expect that's about to happen? People are suffering all over the country financially. Businesses are closing at a record rate. Can we expect for Congress to pass something and enact the PPP loan or react it again where people could take advantage of it?
Well, that's something I'm keeping my eye on, Jay. And right now, it's impossible to predict exactly what Congress is going to do. There's no question in my mind that there's going to be another stimulus package of some kind. Now, what that's going to look like exactly is impossible to say. Of course, it's going to depend on what happens with the presidency. If Biden, in fact, becomes the president of the United States, then and the Democrats control the House and the Senate, Jay, then who knows what kind of a package they're going to present. And so it just depends on 100 different factors. But I will tell you this, and here's another reason why, Jay, the small businesses out there need to stick with us, right? We need to form this brotherhood, this fellowship here, and stick together because the IRS has already announced, Jay, and this is something we can talk about in coming programs. The IRS has already announced a very aggressive program of audits and investigations into all of the CARES Act benefit provisions. All right, so the IRS is aggressively going to be auditing and investigating businesses that used the PPP program, for example. Did you get a PPP loan under false premises? Did you misuse the money in some false or criminal manner? So they're going to look at that. Did you get unemployment tax benefits through the CARES Act in some improper or fraudulent way? There was a whole array of employment tax credits that were added to the law by the CARES Act and the Coronavirus Response Act that actually was the predecessor to the CARES Act. There was actually two major pieces of legislation that came out in March, and there was a whole palette of tax credits, employment tax credits that were put on the books for small businesses to take advantage of. Did you fraudulently claim any credit? So there's the economic impact payment that I was just talking about with George, the $1,200 economic impact payment. Is there fraud associated with that? This is an area, Jay, that the IRS is going to be digging into very significantly for a long time to come. And one of the things I want to talk about in the next program, the upcoming program here of the Pilla Tax Academy show, is I want to talk about the things that small businesses need to do before the end of the year to protect themselves from any sort of a PPP audit. All right, so we're going to go through a list of 3 or 4 things that I am absolutely adamant that small businesses need to do to protect themselves, Jay. And this is just one of the things that we're going to do on an ongoing basis is give people the tools they need to stay out of trouble.
So hey, listen, folks, this time next week, did you hear what Dan just said? So we need to get this message out to everybody that has a small business and say, get on the show because Dan's going to talk about what do you need to do to finish out the year? Things that you must do, you must know. So Dan, one other question before we wrap up the show. What do tax professionals need to know about claiming PPP deductions on tax returns for their clients?
That's a good question, Jay, and this gets back to the revenue procedure. The revenue procedure that we've been talking about, it makes it perfectly clear that an election has to be made on the return. All right. It's not enough to just claim the deductions on the return if your loan is turned down. It's not enough to just claim it on the 2021 return if you don't find out about your denial until, let's say, May of next year. The election has to be made on the tax return. It has to be in writing, Jay, and it has to include those 7 things that I talked about. So tax pros need to know that you've got to follow the steps in the revenue procedure in order to protect your clients. Otherwise, the IRS is not going to allow these deductions to be claimed. And, depending on how much PPP money you got, this can be a huge deal for folks that don't get those loans forgiven.
And you got to get on PillaTaxAcademy.com. Everyone go over, download. Dan's gave some free mega tips that you can grab for free over on PillaTaxAcademy.com. Anybody owns a business, get them over there. If you are just a taxpayer, if you're the regular average taxpayer, doesn't own a business, wouldn't you like to know how the revenue code works and how you can save money on your taxes? That's a big deal. So Dan's put together a mastery course for taxpayers. It's called the Taxpayers Rights Mastery Course. That's a big one. Now, we've got tax pros on here. And Dan did what many call the most powerful tax defense conference of the year. And he does it year in and year out. But 2020 was especially important because of what's happened in 2020. And that mastery course of that event is available over on Pilla Tax Academy. So if you missed it, and there were many people that flew in spite of all the COVID regulations, can you believe it? Dan had people flying in going, I wouldn't have missed this for nothing. They put up with putting masks on and sitting there all day and having masked police walking around. And Dan was like, oh my goodness. But guess what he did? Listen, Dan had to stand. I don't know. How many feet back was it, Dan? Did you have to stand from the person in the front row?
Jay, I felt like I was in left field trying to steal a sign from the catcher. I mean, they had me back 40 feet away from the front row of the audience. I couldn't get any closer. They had a guy standing there with a big hook who was going to pull me back every time I got too close.
But guess what happened? That was the commitment of Dan
Really?
Pilla to go through that, going through craziness on the plane because of all the strict regulations. So y'all got to understand, how important is that event? If Dan will go through all that, but then have all these professionals fly in, paying, about $800 a piece, plus the hotel, plus the flight. They got there, and every one of them, go over to PillaTaxAcademy.com and look at the post-event testimonials. Go over there. And people said they wouldn't have missed it for nothing. You can get it from the comfort of your home or office. And you can sit there and watch it. And on top of it, you can grab 12 continuing education credits. This is crazy. So get on Pilla Tax Academy. Dan's been a great show. Do you have any parting words for our guests?
Yeah, my parting words today is there's no such thing as a hopeless tax problem. I don't care what your problem is. I don't care how long you've had the problem. I don't care what you've tried to do to fix the problem. I don't care who's told you you can't fix the problem. There's no such thing as a hopeless tax problem, but you got to know what your rights are. And more importantly than that, Jay, it's easier to stay out of trouble than it is to get out of trouble.
And that's why Pilla Tax Academy is so critical. Now, next week, we're going to load up with questions. We're going to just bring all your questions. If you own a business, we're going to pound question after question after question to help people understand what they need to do to finish out the year, to prepare for 2021. It's been a great show. Thank you, Dan. You gave a wealth of knowledge. People take it, run with it, share. Do me a favor. Everybody hit the share button. Share this on your wall. Say, if you own a business, you have to hear this. All you got to do, hit share, put it on your wall, and say, if you own a business, you have to see this. Dan, great show. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.